Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys. So hopefully you guys don't mind my voice too much today. Got a little bit of a cold, it's that time of the year, but I am making the sacrifice just for you guys to continue to talk to you and share my opinions despite my major illness that I'm dealing with. So I know I'm going to get comments complaining about my voice because anytime I'm even a little bit sick, and people are like, what is wrong with his voice? What's wrong with his voice? What are we doing here? And so I know those guys are going to be out in force in the comments wondering what's going on with me. But no, I am not dying, so I will be fine. So we've got a lot of questions about Trump's comments on pausing third world immigration from last week. Gillis Enjoyer and Nitro both asked about it. Nitro said, after Wednesday's awful attack, has Trump finally gotten his messaging back on track? He seems to always be at his best in the aftermath of Islamic terrorist attacks. And Gillis Enjoyer asked, Trump had some pretty unexpected comments on immigration last week. How much follow through do you think we can expect from the admin? I know they suspended Afghan visas, which is a good start, but how much of the rest of the actions he described can be achieved purely through executive action, considering Congress is pretty much frozen? Well, he can make it much harder for these visas to come through. But let's go to the bigger issue of his focus on this and what he is saying. We would have been going crazy in a positive way in the first term if Trump have been doing all this stuff in, say, 2018. And it's not merely words. He has instructed, and officials are already starting to pause all asylum requests and to review all visas. So there's now a massive blockage of future immigration requests within our system. That is going to make an impact on the number of migrants who come here. And that's a huge achievement. This isn't just mere words. Even though our whole side is so black-pilled and is like, we're getting fooled again. I was seeing somebody who thinks that we are actually going to implement these restrictions. But he has somehow made himself black-pilled enough that he thinks that this is going to lead to 50 million Indians here, which is just not going to happen. And I was seeing a lot of posts where these guys are permanently wanting to look at the worst that the Trump administration is doing. And they're saying, oh, this is just an attempt to have an insane number of Indians or some other group to come here. And we're not going to fall for this again. We're not falling for this. And it's like, this is actually an achievable goal that's going to reduce immigration. Now, how much of a pause can happen? Congress, it's not going to be holed up in courts. And what he's going to do is he's going to try to do a pause on this, but it's not going to be a formal pause. It's going to be like, well, we're going to have more reviews to slow the process of getting these migrants here, or to place travel restrictions or bans on certain countries, such as what he did with the travel ban. What you're probably going to see not a permanent, but something that will be done throughout the rest of the administration is an expanded travel ban, which is going to make it much harder for a bunch of countries to come here. You're definitely going to see this for Somalia, Afghanistan, a couple of other countries. They're going to face these travel bans. That's going to make it much harder for migrants from those countries to come here. So that is one of the things you're going to see. But on the entire pause, the president can't just stop immigration with, the stroke of a pen. I mean, he did do a moratorium in 2020, different time period. That was also challenged in court, and that was during the height of COVID, when there wasn't that many immigrants coming here. But it's not going to hold up in court if he just blocks immigration, because immigration laws, in terms of the amount of numbers we're bringing in, that is determined by Congress. But the president can make it much harder and much more difficult and restrict certain nationalities from coming here, and that will be upheld by the courts. He did that with the travel ban. He's been doing that with all their mechanisms, and they can make it much harder. I mean, they implemented the public charge rule in the first term. They're bringing that back for the second term. And the public charge rule bars migrants who are likely to be on welfare and other government assistance from obtaining green cards. So they're going to be implementing a lot more restrictions that's going to reduce immigration through executive action. There are ways you can reduce immigration through executive action. You just can't do a complete stop to all immigration, and you can't reduce the allocated total of green cards and visas we hand out every year, or for the most part. You can reduce some of the numbers like H-1Bs and some of the other guest worker visas that executive policy can challenge and maybe determine. But a lot of this stuff is determined by Congress. And of course, Congress is never going to do anything. So, but with his own powers that he can do, he is going to do something. And this is going to, if migrants realize it's much harder to get to the United States of America, which that is the policy of the Trump administration, they are going to reconsider coming here. And that is going to reduce numbers by a certain extent. So, we had plenty of foreign national committed terror attacks in the first term, and he couldn't do any of this stuff. It's all this stuff is forgotten about right after Charlottesville. But in 2017, late 2017, there were 2 terror attacks in New York City. One was a guy placing bombs around the area, immigrant. One of them came for the diversity visa lottery. The other one came through chain migration. I can't remember which one, but there was one guy who placed bombs everywhere. They didn't. I don't believe they killed anyone. And then there was another guy who did a car attack, which is completely forgotten and killed way more people than James Fields did in Charlottesville, but no one remembers it. And these guys were both immigrants. And Trump demanded that Congress, and they were trying to work out a deal over some DACA extension in Congress. DACA is what gives illegal immigrants who came to the U.S. as minors legal status. They were trying to work out some extension of it because it had been an executive order by Obama, and then they were trying to permanentize it. Didn't really go well, but what Trump was trying to do is trying to do these restrictions on chain migration and the diversity visa lottery in response to this. But he didn't do anything on executive action. And these were, major terror attacks. Now he's actually doing something executive branch wise and going ahead and doing it, and it's going to have an effect on it. And the rhetoric is good because it's popularizing the idea that we need to restrict third world immigration. We need to get these ideas out there and make them possible and make more people believe them, and to understand that this is a normal, correct response to a terror attack rather than going off into some stupid war in the third world, which was this response 20, 30 years ago, which is we get a terror attack, we keep allowing these people who came from those countries so they can commit terror attacks here, but then we go and bomb their country, which then sends more migrants here and makes them angrier towards America. That was the old policy. Invade the world, invite the world. Now we're blocking the world from coming here, or trying to. So that's much better. So I think he's definitely back on track on his messaging on immigration. He does have a good instincts on these matters and knows what his base wants to hear. And a lot of his comments, if you guys read my Chronicles article last week on the stuff about his arguments for H-1Bs and student visas, those relate to his obsession with trade deals. He thinks that we need to allow H-1Bs and student visas from China in order to please these countries he's in trade deals with. And these diplomats, they bring it up. They're like, oh, we want these high-skilled immigrants here. And he's like, it's good for our economy. That's great. And he cares more about keeping out, and sometimes he cares more about keeping out foreign goods than foreign nationals. But in this case, when terror attacks happen, he knows what message to broadcast. He won. The time that he definitely won the Republican primary in 2016 is when, right after the San Bernardino shooting, another forgotten terror attack from the Islamic terror attack from the 2010s. Not as forgotten about as the stuff that happened in 2017, but it's not forefront in people's memories, is that Trump came out and called for a Muslim ban. And this was condemned across the party. Paul Ryan and all these leaders condemned it as evil, racist, Islamophobic, and un-American. Mainstream media went crazy. Conservative media went crazy. They were all condemning him. And then his poll numbers, he was really stuck in the mid-20s, like 20%, like 25%. And then he shot up to in the 30s. He finally pushed himself up into the 30s in the polling. And that's what's established him as the undisputed front runner and then helped him win. And so he was the one person willing to suggest that, and that's what helped him win the GOP primary. And here he knows that people are going to be furious that we have all these foreign nationals here, that we give them asylum, and then they go and kill our own troops on American soil. And he knows the correct response to that is to block immigration. And I think we're going to make it insanely difficult, extremely difficult for Afghans to come here, Somalis to come here, and a lot of other groups of people to come here. And it is going to reduce the numbers. Maybe not as much as we want, but it's still something. It's still much more than what we were doing before. And I do think it shows a sign of Trump's good instincts. They're still there. He just needs events to remind him of why he's in the White House and what his base wants. And it's not H-1Bs and it's not more Chinese student visas. So I think it's good. I do find that the problem is that like in our sphere, in the online sphere, that people have just decided that they're fully anti-Trump now. And if whatever he does, they're going to try to find some way to blackpill themselves and some way to attack Trump about this when, we would have been going nuts in the first term if he had been doing this. Because he wasn't really doing anything in his first two years. I mean, what his administration is doing now makes the first term look like a complete failure. And I generally was one of those people who thought the first term was okay in comparison, but this term is blowing it out of the water. And, people were still largely pro-Trump the first year at the end of 2017. Most of our sphere was, even though he wasn't really doing much of anything. Now, it's at least a third of the sphere is extremely anti-Trump for, he's like doing all these things that I thought he wasn't going to do, last year. I didn't think he was going to commute all the J6ers' sentences. I didn't think he was going to make sure the only refugees allowed here were white Afrikaners and a lot of other things. There are issues with the administration. There are issues with what Trump says at times, but largely this is a very successful first term, much better than any other president we've had in my lifetime. And, I think what we see, what the rhetoric he's seeing is very positive for us. Because it's not only restricting immigration, it's also putting the idea out there into public consciousness that we should end third world immigration. And that is something that is dear to our hearts and dear to our cause. And I think that's good for Trump to get it out there. And I think the administration is going to work through executive action and executive policy to limit immigration, legal immigration overall. It's definitely going to be taken to court. They're probably going to have some losses, but it will still reduce immigration by making the wait times longer, subjecting these migrants to greater vetting and restrictions and other matters. There's ways to restrict immigration through executive policy itself. So Gillis Enjoyer has another question that relates to Trump's control of the GOP, and it is relating to the why is the Indiana GOP being so difficult about redistricting? It feels like they've been somehow wrongly convinced that the base is turning on Trump and that working with him hurts their own political prospects. Do you expect that it'll still get pushed through? I don't know if it'll get expected to get pushed through. I mean, Trump is working hard, but it is all of these guys, and they're not from the right. They're all cucks. They're all people like, I can't believe you used the term retarded, and my daughter or my child is Down syndrome, so I'm not voting for this. I'm like, what? How is this a reasoning for this? I cannot believe that some guy is like, I wanted to hurt my own party because I'm personally offended by a statement Trump made. These guys suck. This is like shows a lot of like the state legislators. It depends on the state. Like in the South, these state legislators are really hardcore conservative. In some ways, kind of idiotically hardcore conservative. Like if you go to Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, they're very conservative. The only way that they'll cuck is if it somehow relates to college football. That'll really get them up in arms. It's so funny. I think we got a Lane Kiffin question, but I feel like if the Mississippi legislature could pass a law to arrest Lane Kiffin, they would pass it in like an hour. So, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that. I think he's already left to Louisiana. So I think Louisiana might protect him from from arrest from Mississippi. And there is funny things about Tennessee legislature threatening to target the NCAA after NCAA threatened to go after UT for recruiting violations and other things. But they're generally very conservative. Even though sometimes act stupidly, they're pretty conservative. But a lot of these Midwestern states, especially like Indiana, where they don't have as many problems as the South or awareness of racial issues and other things, as the South, like its whole politics is based on how they can limit black districts. And they've all accepted this, even though they're about, oh man, it's not about race. Like Texas has is in a really funny battle where they claim that they were going to give more districts to give greater representation to Hispanics because they think Hispanics are all going Republican. And now they're having to claim in court, well, like, no, it's not about race. They do funny things like that, and so throughout the rest of the South. But, implicitly and instinctually, they know what they're doing. But in Indiana, they get really mad about this. Like, goes against democracy. This goes against our basic rights. Gerrymandering is not good. That's what Democrats do. And you see this in Utah. I mean, Utah's not the Midwest, but it's a similar type of lily white state that they don't have to deal with these issues as much. I mean, Indiana does have a few diverse spots, but it's not as it doesn't weigh as much on Indianans as much as it does on Southerners. So they're like, this isn't democratic, this isn't fair, so we don't like this. So I think that's why you see all these Indiana GOP being cucks. It's a very cucky state. It produced Mike Pence. Mike Braun wasn't even that good of a senator. They've got a much better senator now in Jim Banks, but it's generally not the most right-wing state. And you're seeing these cucks come out. And convinced by the base is turning on Trump, these people are not representing the base. These guys are like old school Jeff Flake, never Trumpers. Like these are not the, Marjorie Taylor Greene's like a chemtrail Jeff Flake, and her politics are all over the place. People want to believe that it's coming from the right, but a lot of it's coming from the center. She's critical of the mass deportation. She's upset that they're not funding food stamps as much and all this other silly crap. Once you become a Trump critic, you become an all-purpose Trump critic. You will criticize Trump from the left, from the right, from wherever you feel is necessary. Now, most of these guys that are criticizing Trump in Indiana, they are criticizing Trump from the moderate Republican wing. They have those principles about that, but they're willing to go further to the left because they hate Trump so much. And so a lot of cucks are emerging from that, as you see this in battles elsewhere over redistricting. So, the South gets a lot of crap, especially Southern Republicans. I mean, there is like silliness about them. They really are into have an obsession with college football. Now they're starting to make college football players and coaches like lawmakers. Now sometimes it's good because like Tommy Tuberville is one of the better Republican senators, but there is silliness about the South, but they are much better than the rest of the GOP. You would not have a lot of guys in Tennessee. Tennessee, you don't need to ask them to redistrict. They'll do that on their own. And that's the same in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Texas. All the Southerners realize that the only way they can win is by blocking out certain blue districts and redistricting them and favoring white Republican voters. Everywhere else, in a lot of these states where they don't have as much diversity and they still have a Midwestern nice attitude or they're Mormons, they will just go, well, that's not fair, that's not democratic, and you see these cucks emerging. There's still a lot of cucks in the GOP. They haven't gotten eliminated. A lot of times we think that the party is just Trump supporters and then the massive far right. And the far right, there really hasn't emerged. the closest you have is Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think a reason why she retired is she realized she would lose her election, and she didn't want that embarrassment, and she wants to run for president. But she's going to learn that there's not much support outside of the internet for, someone from the far right in the GOP to challenge Trump. And Massey, he's terrible on immigration. People like his foreign policy stuff. So there hasn't really emerged like this solidly far right critic of Trump. Now, in Congress, there's not that many of those guys. You got Bacon from Nebraska, maybe a few other people. Most of those people have left. But there's still these people in the state legislature and you're in various states' legislatures, and you're seeing that in Indiana. So he's still got a lot of work to do to kick out these types, and hopefully he punishes these people by running primary challenges against them for opposing his redistricting efforts. But it is what it is. It's pretty pathetic. We had a question from New England Refugee about strip malls. Very important question because Tucker Carlson came out against them. I actually have an article coming out tomorrow at defense of strip malls, but New England Refugee, he seems very classist to say this to me. Your thoughts on strip malls? The thing is like, dude, strip malls, like if you pass them on the interstate, or not on the interstate, but on the highways and stuff, well, you'll sometimes see them on the interstate, but they are depressing to look at. They are ugly, and you do like, is this all America? Is this strip malls? But the thing is like, the only people who really think that are like intellectuals and artist types or whatever, or dissident types. And the average person is fine with strip malls. Is that we're a car-based society. They provide convenient locations for you to go and get the stuff you want, or food or whatever. They're also very practical and functional. If one business falls, any other business can be there. It can be a karate studio. It can even be a church. It can be a food stand, or not a food stand, but a Chipotle, a pizza store. It could be anything. We have a boom and bust cycle. Not every, small businesses usually fall, especially restaurants of that sort. And, the reason why a lot of Cracker Barrel and all these other places have gone for a refinement culture style, like just a box store that it could be anything, they don't have like the distinctive like Pizza Hut architecture or Cracker Barrel architecture, is because, or at least Cracker Barrel tried to do that, is because a lot of these places fall, they fail, and then they need to resell that space and that building to someone else. And if it's, it looks like a Pizza Hut, they have to do more work on it, and they have to completely demolish it because, if you're opening up, a Domino's or whatever, or, some, a Chipotle, we're going to keep using Chipotle, you don't want to be shaped like a Pizza Hut. So that's why they all go for this. Now, obviously, it kind of sucks. You want some distinctive features, but it's a part of American capitalism and other things for this to happen. And so, yeah, they are not like good to look at. It is a bit depressing to go, driving down the highway and that's all you see. But that's what Americans vote for. That's what Americans like, because Americans prize practicality and convenience over aesthetics and taste. And a lot of like, what do you want to replace strip malls? Like, we all have these like classical architecture, like grandiose Chipotle store. I don't think that's going to happen. So you're just going to have the strip malls, and it is what it is. And it's also funny when ordinary conservatives heard that. It goes to this part of the article I wrote a few months ago about the Tweety intellectual versus the used car dealer. I wouldn't say Tucker's a Tweety intellectual, but he represents a kind of right-wing intellectual outlook. And they don't like strip malls for aesthetic tastes. It upsets them. And they want, some organic, nice architecture mom and pop store, which is just not going to happen. Meanwhile, the ordinary conservative, which, doesn't really care about aesthetics and taste, they just strive for something that's going to, make money, not result in a lot of taxes, be practical, be convenient, be functional. And they don't have no problem with strip malls, because it's like, you know, that's where they could shop for everything. And then they're got a busy schedule driving on the roads and everything. And they're like, oh, I'll stop for you for lunch or whatever. So it is what it is. It's a part of American civilization. It's part of American society. We're not going to eliminate them. We don't have something else to eliminate or to replace them with. So they are what they are. I don't want to. Well, I do have my defense of strip malls article coming out tomorrow, but I understand the aesthetic preference against them. But you often have to separate your aesthetic preferences from policy decisions or economic agenda. Because a lot of times we allow aesthetic preferences to determine all of our, economic preferences and social policy and other things. For a lot of the right, they're like, well, I want a, beautiful society and other things. Well, we all do, but, the end result of that is just going to cripple the economy. And if we got rid of the strip malls, that would likely destroy, put a major damper on our economy. And we don't have anything to replace it with. It's not like Americans are clamoring for, some alternative to strip malls. And even when you look at the defense of Cracker Barrel, Cracker Barrel's not necessarily a strip mall, but it's usually right next to a strip mall. We were all defending it as our culture. This is our authentic culture, and it's a fast food chain, or not a fast food chain, but a chain restaurant. So that's what a lot of Americans deeply care about. It's not the same things that right-wing intellectuals or wannabe intellectuals and dissidents care about. So they are what they are. I mean, I would rather, if you don't like being around them, you've got to make a lot of money to live in an area where there's not that many strip malls. But that's part of it. And the average American is certainly not bothered by it. And they actually enjoy, or I don't know if enjoy is the correct term, but they are fine with what the strip malls are like. We've got a lot of sports questions today. So, IPA Enjoyer asks about Lane Giga Chad Kiffin is a plot by Frankist and the French intelligentsia who want to retake Louisiana for themselves. And he goes along, all these people are going against Lane Kiffin. Are Soros-funded Antifa operatives working undercover in West Coast sports media seeking to reinstate a hyper-woke Pac-12? Curious to hear your thoughts on this clear-cut conspiracy against a God-fearing Trump supporter. Well, on one hand, I like Ole Miss, because Ole Miss, even though it's not the right-wing school anymore, it's still is the perceived of it. The fans there still have some of the old South to them. It still has that reputation of being the most reactionary Southern school, but it's also the easiest SEC school to get into. But I like Ole Miss. I like the Rebels. I don't like LSU. LSU fans were really obnoxious. I grew up going to Vanderbilt games because they were cheap tickets, because Vanderbilt doesn't have real fans. And so, but we go and get cheap tickets to go see them play all these SEC teams. And I remember LSU fans were so obnoxious. One, there's no Vanderbilt fans. And these guys oh, hi, Vandy sucks. Fuck the doors. And I'm like, dude, Vandy's going to lose. This is back when Vandy was really bad. So, why are you trying to talk shit to Vanderbilt fans? It's like talking shit to the special ed class or something. So I never liked LSU for those reasons. I always thought, I don't have any Louisiana connections. So I always found their fans really obnoxious. And everyone in the SEC generally talks about how they have the most obnoxious fans within the SEC. And so I like Ole Miss, don't like LSU. But I like Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin is just really funny. There's the funny clip of him, his daughter showing off one of their players with his not very attractive child. And it's mixed. And he's like, what is that? And it's oh, it's his kid. And he's like, oh yeah, it's beautiful. And he's a huge Trump supporter. He keeps calling it Gulf of America, not Gulf of Mexico. He's just really funny. I think Lane Kiffin is really funny. He is the most hated football coach in college football. Teams just hate what he does. When I was at Tennessee at the time when he left UT. This is 2010. And Knoxville had a riot, near riot on campus over him leaving abruptly to go to USC. So he always leaves these programs on bad terms, and his time at USC was a failure. I think he'll probably be good at LSU. He probably should have stayed at Ole Miss because he had built up a solid program. They're winning games. They're competing. They're going to the college football playoff. He's got a good thing going with Ole Miss, but he feels that LSU is a better program. And historically, they are. They've won national titles. I'm not sure. Ole Miss, I think they did win a national title, but it was like back in the 50s. They generally have not been very good for the last 50 years or so. They've had, Lane Kiffin has made them a top program. They've usually been pretty mediocre. When Eli Manning was there, they were pretty good. They had a few good years, but they're generally not one of the top programs in the SEC. But he has made them one of the top programs in the SEC. He has full control over the program. He's making them winning team. He's got his players. He's basically he's got that job locked in. And now he goes to one of the rivals, which shows like one of the a lot of the major problems with college football. You generally did not go to a rival program back in the day. You did not go from FSU to Florida. You did not go from Alabama to Auburn. You did not do these things. Now, it's perfectly normal to go from a team that's competing in the national title to go to another team. That's what happened with Brian Kelly. Notre Dame was either in the college football playoff or went to the national title game. I forget which one. They were in the playoff, so they're top 4 teams at that time. And then he left to go to LSU because he felt that Notre Dame couldn't win the national title. He thought he would win one with LSU. Didn't happen. And it's the same with Lane Kiffin. And also they're offering a lot more money at LSU than they were at Ole Miss. And he feels that through transfer portal and his reputation that he can build up his team in a way that will be a lot better. So, I don't like those aspects about it, but it's not really Lane Kiffin creating the expectation. This is just the nature of college football that is today. And I still like Lane Kiffin. That's really just it. I just like him. I think he's a really funny coach. I think he's really conservative. He's like a Chad White guy. He's just really funny. He's like, I did a lot of praying and soul searching, and after trying to poach the entire team, including the coaching staff and players, God told me this, and I'm now going to LSU. So it's funny. I can't hate the guy. But if I'm actually going through the issues with the team, I would probably say it's probably a bad move. It's not a good sign for college football. I remember thinking it was stupid for Brian Kelly to leave Notre Dame to go to LSU and being like, this is like a real problem in college football. And Lane Kiffin is contributing to that, but I like Lane Kiffin a lot more than Brian Kelly. I mean, he's still my favorite college football coach. He's got a lot of personality. You don't have many Steve Spurrier types anymore, so it's good to see someone like that in college football. He's a more goofball Steve Spurrier, so that's funny about it. But I still like him. That's the main point. But I can understand hating him if you really don't like Lane Kiffin. But, you can't hate the guy. He's a lovable rogue. He's a goofball. He's a Trump supporter. So we still have to support him. Hopefully he does well at LSU. Even though I greatly prefer Ole Miss. Ole Miss is, the 3 teams in the SEC I'm going to root for are Vandy, UT. I mean, Vandy and UT are technically rivals, but, Vandy's usually not good. But, I generally root for both of them, and then Ole Miss. So, generally the teams I root for. I don't root for LSU, but I hope for the best for him. I hope he wins a national title. I want the best for Lane Kiffin, so I might do some rooting for LSU over the coming years. We got another sports question from Dude Normative. He said, do you think the mulatto and the model of Patrick Mahomes is the optimal NFL quarterback phenotype? Perhaps an ideal balance of size, speed, intelligence, and contemplativeness. I don't know about that. Is that first off, Mahomes isn't having that good of a year. And also, this is the year of the white boy and the quarterbacks. It's like all the best quarterbacks right now are white. Daniel Jones, Darnold, Stafford, not Trevor Lawrence has some good games, but he's really inconsistent. Josh Allen, Drake May, Bo Nix, these guys are doing extremely well. Oh, and Jackson Dart, he's like coming out as his team sucks, but he's coming out as a solid rookie quarterback. It's once again the white boys returning and doing well as the white quarterback, much better than the not so white quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts aren't having that good a year. Jaden Daniels been injured, so I guess C.J. Stroud is starting to be improved, but they're not doing as well this year. Meanwhile, the white quarterbacks are doing phenomenal. So I don't know. People were making that type, but we'll see how Mahomes plays throughout his career. I mean, he's still the best quarterback in the league, but he's not doing that well this year. So I don't know if that would be the optimal one. They want to think it's the optimal one. Also, what's happening is that a lot of these guys are the children of college athletes. Is that both their mom and dad are college athletes. You're seeing a lot of mixed race players in the NBA, and they're doing very well. Steph Curry, even though he's younger, but a lot of the younger guys are also mixed race. And you're also seeing that with the football. And a lot of those guys, they're going to have a greater amount of intelligence and ability and the kind of dedication and leadership to be a quarterback. So you're going to see a lot more Mahomes types in the NFL going forward. But I don't know. I would probably disagree with that. I think it's still, because it's a lot of other things that go into play there. You've got to really be a level-headed guy who can deal with extremely stressful situations and just throw the ball, not get hassled, not get your confidence messed up, and be like Montana, or Tom Brady. So I don't know about that, but it's an interesting question. Let's see. I'm recording this a bit earlier, so some people didn't send in their questions, by now, but that's okay. We'll save them up for the mailbag. Dollar Bill has a question. He said, at the Daily Caller, were there employees who were openly liberal despite working for a conservative publication? Would you overhear water cooler conversations where someone would blurt out things like, no one is illegal, trans rights are human rights, we need to abolish whiteness, immigrants do the jobs Americans won't do? Well, the last one, there were some people like that, but no, there were some sort of liberal people there, but they were all gone by the time of 2016, 2017. It was really just moderate Republicans and people who hated Trump. There was a lot. The majority of the publication was probably anti-Trump in the primary. And people got really mad if you were pro-Trump, the 2016 primary. And there were still people debating whether to vote for Evan McMullin or Trump in the general election. There was a divided office, but that was the same with every conservative media publication. No, there wasn't really that many liberals. No, there was no liberals as far as I know. There was some when I first started working there, but they were gone by 2015. The real issue was never Trump conservatives. And a lot of these people left, Jamie Weinstein and Matt Lewis both left after the 2016 election. So they were no longer there. They didn't want to be associated with a Trump supporting publication anymore. And so they moved elsewhere. But no one is illegal. There would be very pro-immigration people there though, but no one was. We need to abolish whiteness, man. That was hardcore leftism for 2017, especially trans rights stuff. Nobody was into that, but there were some people who were like, immigrants are great, we need to give them an amnesty. But that was more just a standard conservative line. Max Zoid has a question. I think he's pulling my leg, so I don't want to read the whole thing because he's talking about his medications. But he said, what are your thoughts on the good doctor scarcity plaguing our country? And he asked about my favorite strategies for lowering urinary frequency. I think he's just pulling my leg, but I have no strategies for that. And I did not know that there's a good doctor scarcity plaguing our country. There's a thing. Doctors, you always do have to have some degree of skepticism of, because, they could have wrong tests or they're trying to sell you stuff. But I don't have that many thoughts on good doctor scarcity. I'm not an anti-doctor type. There are some right-wingers who are like, we don't need doctors. Doctors just give you the vax. And so I'm not one of those types, but I don't have much thoughts on good doctor scarcity plaguing our country, or would agree that it is plaguing our country. So, no, I don't have any thoughts on that. So, we, once again, as I said, I'm going to refresh. I think some people did not get their questions in, or some people maybe were waiting till the morning. Some people send questions at a weird time, but I'm recording this a bit earlier than usual, so we're just left with L.K. Rurik to round us out today with his final question. And he said, you couldn't go in depth in the limited format of a written mailbag, so pardon my repetition, but what would the very abridged version of each foreign policy episode suggestions from Wednesday be? Well, we'll go to his previous mailbag question. You know, we've got time because it's a shorter podcast today because people may have had too much turkey and maybe too much fun over Thanksgiving weekend. But what he asked in the mailbag last week is that now that you've done the Middle East and China, I think the logical continuation for episodes on American foreign policy are in this order: the rest of the Anglosphere, Latin America, Russia, France, Japan, and Germany. Those are the ones I think have enough substance for a full episode. Do you agree with this assessment? So, the first would be Latin America. Russia, Anglosphere, I don't know. Like, our relations with Britain has a long, complicated history. You would do Britain, not the Anglosphere. I mean, I don't think our maybe a relationship with Canada. I don't think there's much there for our relationship with Australia and New Zealand, but and also where the Anglosphere. But you could do two separate with Canada and Britain. Those would be interesting. Russia would be interesting, and Germany. Japan, you know, that would relate to our Pacific War. And I've done some stuff on it, but I think outside of that, I don't know if there's quite a full comprehensive book on it. France, I would put at the bottom, man. France is not that. I don't think it's that interesting a topic, and we haven't been that close with allies. I mean, they helped us in the revolution, and we had an anti-French outlook in the colonial age. But beyond that, it's not been that interesting. I did cover some of that in my Jefferson Davis podcast on Bonapartism and Francophilia among some Southerners. But I don't think that's as interesting. I think the most interesting ones are definitely Britain, Canada, Latin America, Germany, and Russia. Russia, very important. He has a ranking of them. It would be hard to rank. I think they're all equal. But I would say Japan and France are definitely not equal to those, and France is definitely at the bottom of is definitely the back of the pack. I think Germany is very interesting because we don't really have a good understanding of our foreign policy relations with Germany pre-World War One. People don't know about this, and we're in a lot of conflict with them and tension with them because people don't understand. It's like, well, why do we favor the British? Well, we had not a very friendly relationship with Germany prior to World War One, as they were competing. They were interfering in our sphere in Latin America and in the South Pacific, and we were starting to already compete with them. And then we just did not get along with Germany. It's the same with Russia. We've only really gotten along with Russia when Russia backed us, or not backed us, but backed the Union. Sorry, I cannot say us. My ancestors fought for the Confederacy, but backed the U.S. or backed the Union in the Civil War. But they only did that because they thought that the British who was their main geopolitical foe at the time, was backing the Confederates. And so they thought that the Union winning would weaken the British. But we've generally not had very positive relations with Russia throughout our history. And we had a very negative view of Russia throughout it. It's one of the reasons why we were reluctant to support the Entente in World War One, is because the American people did not like the Tsar. So, yeah, those would be very interesting. I think Latin America probably will be the first one. I said in the mailbag that it's a very complicated subject, but there is a book to that covers America's relationship with Latin America up into the 1990s, which I could do a review of, and that would cover most of it. You could do one specifically on Mexico, but I think this one would cover the majority of our relationship with Mexico and Cuba and other countries that we've had relations with and our general theme in Latin America. I'm sure Nemetz, we could probably have Nemetz on to discuss our relationship with Canada. Britain, I know there's a lot of great books on our relationship with Britain. You might even have to break that up into different topics of like 19th century, our post-Revolutionary War relationship with Britain, then 20th century relationship with Britain. But there's a lot to go with there. So, yeah, those are great suggestions. I think it's just that France, maybe, if there's a really good book on America's relations with France, I would probably do that. Same with Japan. It's all dependent on whether there's a solid volume on this subject. I don't know if there's a good volume on America's relationship with Germany, historical relationship with Germany, but I would like to read that, and there should be. I think there is one on Russia. I know there are several on our relationship with Britain and Latin America. So yes, I will definitely cover those subjects in the new year, in 2026. So we will have a lot of subjects on that. So I don't know what he meant by version of it, but just a relationship with it. I mean, those change over time. Britain, we've had, since War of 1812, we've had some tensions and conflicts. You know, one of the reasons that we annexed the Mexican, or not Mexico, but Texas, is to prevent the UK from annexing it, and that was seen as a great threat to us. And also, a lot of the Southerners thought that the UK was our main enemy because they were an anti-slave power, and they thought that the Brits were riling up slave revolts all throughout the New World. But ever since the Civil War, we've been close allies. We've had some tensions over Latin America, but we've generally gotten along. Latin America is an extremely complicated subject that I cannot do an abridged version. I gave an abridged version of Russia. Germany, I gave an abridged version. But in Japan, we generally didn't have the best relations, unlike China. One is because Japan was more restrictive of American commerce coming in than China. Also, they did not allow missionaries. They were also much more restrictive of missionaries. So we always thought like Japan was the evil power in Asia versus the good power that we could guide, like China. France, we got some ideas from, obviously, and we did have an interesting relationship with over the French Revolution. Actually, probably the IQ something to do is American attitudes towards the French Revolution. There's enough material for that, and I know there's a couple books on it to discuss that and how the French Revolution was received by America. That would probably be the IQ supplement I would do that I find most interesting. Everything beyond that, and Napoleon, that would probably be the most interesting. Anything beyond that, I don't think is as interesting. But maybe if there's, like I said, a comprehensive volume on the subject, I would be open to reviewing it. So that is it for Highly Respected today. This is probably one of the shortest Highly Respected episodes we've had in a very long time. But, you know, this is, that's fine. I think some people complain my podcasts are too long, but this is it for Highly Respected today. We're going to have more great content coming up this week. So we've got an article on strip malls tomorrow. We will have a fantastic mailbag on Wednesday. Also on Friday, the IQ supplement should be a review of Ken Burns' American Revolution. I did get questions about this subject in previous Highly Respected episodes, and I did promise that we will do an IQ supplement on it, and it should be coming out at the end of this week, so be on the lookout for that. So, normal schedule beyond that, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.